So welcome to today's seminar. My name is Nancy Holm. I'm the Assistant Director at ISTC and Seminar Organizer along with Beth Mashesky. This spring the seminars have focused on the topic of reuse and recycling. We have two more upcoming seminars in our series, and the flyers for those seminars are on the table outside the conference room here, and for those listening online, we've got them listed on our events on our ISTC website. So please plan to join us for those talks. In case you cannot attend one of those in person, all of the seminars are shown live via GoToWebinar and are also archived, recorded and archived and posted on our website. It usually takes about a week for the video to be posted after the presentation date. With that, we'll begin today's seminar. I would ask all those attending here to please silence your cell phones. Also, we'll hold questions for the speaker until the end of the presentation, and then I'll come around with the microphone for questions at that time. And for those viewing online, you may type your questions in at any time, and then we'll answer those at the end also. We're very pleased today to have for our guest speaker Dr. Linda Chalker-Scott. Dr. Scott is at Washington State University at the Puyallup Research and Extension Center. She is a Washington State Extension Urban Horticulturist and Associate Professor in the Department of Horticulture. Dr. Scott has a PhD in horticulture from Oregon State University and is an ISA certified arborist. She's the author of 4 books, most recently publishing How Plants Work, the Science Behind the Amazing Things Plants Do. She and 3 other academic colleagues host the Garden Professors, a blog and Facebook pages through which they educate and entertain an international audience. With that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Scott from Washington, and today she's going to be presenting for us a talk on rubbery shrubbery. Should we use rubber mulch in our landscapes? Dr. Scott, we'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Nancy, and thanks everybody for attending. Can't see you, but I'm sure you're just excited to be here. I'm really looking forward to this. A little bit of background about why I do what I do. I was trained as a plant physiologist, and for years and years was a bench scientist. And over time, especially with my teaching responsibilities, I gravitated more and more into field and practical research. And I've really started doing a lot of citizen science, scientific literacy, and mostly just translating science for non-scientists to use, especially in their gardens and landscapes. And one of the areas that I was interested in and have published in both popular and peer-reviewed journals is on landscape mulches. And as I was doing this, I ran into rubber mulch, which is a relatively new product. And of course, I was curious about it to see whether it worked or not and whether it was a good use of old tires. And it seems a perfect topic for your sustainability seminar. So what we're going to do today is, there we go. Talk first about what exactly rubber mulch is. There are questions about what it's made out of. Does it actually work as a mulch? And we'll talk about some of the characteristics that landscape mulches should have and what the environmental impacts are. So that'll be the first segment. And then, because I think it's always important, if you found some valid reasons not to use a product, I've got some suggestions of alternatives. And those of you that happen to be extension educators or otherwise interacting with the public, this could be some valuable information for them. So I'll discuss a few choices that there are out there in terms of landscape mulches that might be better, what their benefits are, and then I'll end up with some resources, both online and, as Nancy mentioned, some print resources too for further education. So I have to say the first time I ever heard about reusing tires for something else was back in the 70s, and this is, of course, when there was all kinds of scrap tire fires burning out of control, and industry and EPA and everybody else was very interested in figuring out ways of reusing this material. And my brother was the proud owner of a pair of sandals that were made from recycled tires, and so the bottom of the, were tire treads. And we were both very proud of that because as teenagers in the 1970s, with a lot of environmental regulations coming in, we thought it was very important to keep this stuff out of landfills and from burning. So reusing tires is an important thing. Some of the things that it's used for right now is generating energy. It's a very energy-rich resource, as you can tell, because it burns like crazy. There's a lot of energy in those bonds. It's also used for rubberizing asphalt, and that's been a good addition for asphalting roads for reducing the cracking and wear from weather and from tires. And then most recently there's been a use on playfields and landscapes, and as you can see from the picture there, that there's a variety of different types of rubber mulches, and they can be dyed a variety of different colors. I've given you two of the more common ones. You can see that the one there on the left, or the center, is red. It kind of looks like cedar chips, and the black one possibly looks like it's been burnt, but it's not. And a lot of people really like this because they find it aesthetically pleasing to have a mulch that is uniform in color and texture and is a nice background for their plants. So why would one use this as a mulch? There's a variety of reasons that industry says that this is a good mulch. As you can tell from the picture there, the color will last up to 12 years, and many landscape mulches fade out fairly quickly, exposed to sunlight. Another claim is it will eliminate annual mulching, prevents insects and weed growth, 99.99% wire-free, and made from 100% recycled tires. And so, again, from a sustainability standpoint, this sounds really great. It's a 100% recycled material. It apparently has a lot of the attributes that one would want from a landscape mulch in terms of staying around for a while, preventing insects from getting in, keeping weeds down, and again, having that aesthetic attractiveness. So what I look at on this topic and on many topics that I do, and I get a lot of suggestions for horticultural myths or ideas or whatever, and I will go into the published literature, the peer-reviewed literature, and I'll look to see what I can find on a particular topic or a particular practice. And so again, with the rubber mulch, what I did is I went through to look through to see if there were publications on all the things that you would expect a landscape mulch to do, whether it's to suppress weeds or to benefit plants or to retain water. And I will tell you that there is not a whole lot published on rubber mulches yet. There are probably maybe a couple dozen papers, maybe not even that many, where it even mentions using rubber mulches at all. However, in the papers that did exist where they were looking at rubber mulches, especially in comparison to other mulches, they found that rubber mulch is much less effective in controlling weeds than organic mulches. And on the left there you can see a picture of a rubber mulch that's been around for a while. It's started to lose its color, so it's probably been there several years, and you can see that weeds are already starting to come through it. So it's not something that's going to keep weeds out. On the right-hand side, that's actually not a rubber mulch per se, but it is artificial turf. And the base of artificial turf is a crumb rubber. And you can see that also weeds can come up right through it as well. So whether the claim is made because of the chemicals in rubber mulch or whatever the claims are, there's no science behind the claim that it reduces weeds. It's much less effective than other choices of mulches. Well, of course, mulches should also have some beneficial impacts on plants. They should help them establish, they should help them thrive, as well as keeping out weeds and other things that might compete. What has been found with plants that have been grown in the vicinity of rubber mulches, and this is especially true of trees, is that chlorosis is seen to occur, reduced tree growth, increased tree mortality. These are some of the results from the studies that have actually been done using rubber landscape mulches. And in the picture there, it's obviously not a tree, but it shows what type of chlorosis you might see if you were using rubber mulch under a tree. Soil tests that have been done in these situations and other situations where they weren't looking at tree establishment have found very high levels of zinc in soil that's underlying rubber mulch. This isn't too surprising. Tires consist of about 2% by weight of zinc. It's used as part of the strengthening process. So that metal leaches out, and the result on plants exposed to high levels of zinc is that yellowing there on the left. So even though some of these studies didn't draw all these, connect all these dots, there are enough studies that show, especially what zinc toxicity can do in terms of plant effects. And on the picture on the right, what I want you to see there is that, I hope you can see that, where it looks like there's little threads there that could be mistaken for cedar needles or something like that, but those are actually wires. So this is a handful of mulch actually that my husband is holding as I take a picture of it. And even though things are advertised as being 99.99% wire-free, you obviously can find wire without trying too hard. So the wire is a source of a lot of that zinc, and the zinc is also embedded in the rubber itself. So there's a real negative impact associated with plants that are grown around rubber mulches for any length of time. The third area I was able to find some research on has to do with pests, specifically with insects. And so you'll recall from that first slide that showed all the benefits that rubber mulch would keep out weeds and would also keep out pests. And there was only one paper so far having anything to do with insect pests, and this unfortunately has to do with Asian cockroaches. Nothing that's a very pleasant insect to look at, and they look both at the females and at the nymphs. And so the female is there on the left, and the nymph is to the right of her. What they found looking at Asian cockroaches and different types of mulches, and this includes all type of mulches, organic, inorganic, and rubber, they found that rubber mulches were the most preferred material for Asian cockroaches. And so that was not only for the females, but for the nymphs, and this is where the females would lay the eggs. So this in itself would be enough for me to run screaming from using rubber mulch, because there's nothing that I dislike more than I dislike roaches. Wood chips, which were one of the other materials that was tested, were the least preferred. And I'm mentioning wood chips because when we come up to alternatives, I want you to remember that this is one of the materials that at least Asian cockroaches like the least in terms of shelter and area for laying eggs. So that really kind of sums up the research behind using rubber mulches and landscapes. As I said, there's not very much research on there. I hope that there will be more as time goes, but it's not, landscape horticulture is not an area that generates a whole bunch of money, and without a lot of funding, you don't get a lot of these studies done. But that leads then to the question is, if you have rubber mulches and you have no real benefit to them in terms of their impact on plants and keeping out weeds and pests, should they be in places where they're going to be in greater contact with people, pets, and the environment? So this is the second half of the rubber mulch question. The first half is, do they work in the landscape? And so far the research that's out there says no, they're not effective as a mulch should be. So the second question is, what are the drawbacks of using rubber mulches in landscapes? Well, as you might expect, because we've had tire fires that have burned for decades, mulches are made of the same material as tires are, and they're quite flammable. There's been at least 2 studies looking at flammability, and not surprisingly, rubber mulch is the most likely of all the mulches tested to ignite and the most difficult to extinguish. And this work, well, I believe there was about 13 different landscape mulches that were tested, anything from straw and wood chips to rubber and to stone and brick. And so all these mulches were put out into areas and attempted to be ignited, even the brick and stone, and we know that sounds pretty ridiculous, but when you're doing experimental research, you have to treat everything the same. So everything was was exposed to the same amount of flame, and as I said, the rubber mulches burn the hottest and the longest of all of them. This has had some real impacts in the real world, and this is something that I found from the Rutherford Fire Department in Pennsylvania. There's been a number of these reported all over the country, and this one is just one that happened to have a great picture associated with it. And as I mentioned earlier, rubber mulches get used in playgrounds as well as landscapes. Sometimes they're not chunky, coarse mulch. They might be rubber pavers. And the problem is that they've been set on fire by vandals in many places, and if the fire is hot enough to melt metal playground equipment and to scorch nearby buildings. So this is a real issue, especially if you happen to be in an area where forest fire or residential fires might be a question. I would think that this choice of mulch would be very poor for any place that had the possibility of having wildfire. The second question that is or the second concern that's a drawback is the longevity of rubber mulch. And in some of the information I've seen advertising rubber mulches, the fact that you don't have to replace it because it's going to just last forever, and it really doesn't last forever. Nothing really does. As you might expect, since rubber is an organic compound, and there's other things in there too, but there are things that will decompose rubber, just as they will decompose tires. So the tires are broken down by a number of microbes. There's been quite a bit of research on this. Many bacterial species can actually feed on rubber as their sole source of energy. Keeping in mind, of course, that tires burn hot. That means there's a lot of energy stored in there, and microbes can use that in their metabolism. There's also white and brown rot fungi that will break down rubber, and this photograph is of a rubber mulch, and you can see the mushrooms that are popping through beneath it. So you can imagine that if you were to pull that rubber mulch up and look at it, you would find that it would be pretty much infiltrated with fungal hyphae. So it's not that it's going to resist decomposition. In fact, it is going to decompose just like any other mulch does. Now when that happens, not only do you not have a long-lasting mulch, but you also are going to have breakdown products as a result of this. And this gets into what I feel are, next to flammability, are the biggest human environmental safety issues that there could be. One of the things, of course, that's released are heavy metals. I mentioned the zinc before. Quite a bit of zinc, but there's many other heavy metals in there as well. Cadmium, chromium, many things that are of concern for exposure to humans and to the environment. And then there are compounds that are plasticizers, and these are things that are added to make the finished product more flexible. And there's also accelerators, and those are compounds that are added to accelerate the vulcanizing process, which is used when tires are made. So you've got rubber, which is a natural compound. You've got a number of heavy metals that are associated with making tires, and then you've got these other chemicals that are added that either add flexibility or will increase the process of making tires in the first place. This is where there is a lot of research, and it's not so much that there's research on tires as there is research on decomposition of rubber and on play fields and crumb rubber, and we're going to draw all that in together to make a bigger story. However, looking at decomposing tires, there was a researcher at Bucknell University who unfortunately never finished. Well, she finished the research, but then she changed jobs and she didn't publish this work outside of a report. But she found that in aquatic systems that entire communities were killed off by being exposed to discarded tires, and this was anything from algae to zooplankton to fish. And it was just, it would create complete dead zones around wherever they were disposed of. It tends to be more of a problem with freshwater environments. It also there's been published research looking at marine environments, but it seems that the freshwater systems tend to be more sensitive to the exposure to the leachates coming out of discarded tires. If you're not familiar with why people would put tires underwater, besides the fact they don't want to see them, they toyed with the idea for a number of years, especially in the ocean, to use them as artificial reefs. So they would dump a whole bunch of tires in marine environments in the hope to have them colonized by various creatures that would attach, and then the fish that would perhaps use it as shelter. And they found that virtually nothing could live there just because it's such a toxic environment. When you have smaller pieces of rubber or tires, they're going to leach more. So in other words, if you have a tire, and a lot of people use rubber tires in their garden for growing vegetables or whatever, and there's going to be an issue there with leaching as well, but it doesn't leach as quickly as it does when you start chopping that tire up into smaller and smaller pieces. And the reason, of course, is because you've got a larger surface area, and so there's more surface to be degraded, and your leaching potential goes up. So in my hand down there in the picture, I've got crumb rubber, which is what's used in these artificial play fields as the base for the artificial turf. So there's been quite a bit of work looking at what happens, especially to people, from a human concern about what's going to happen if you're exposed to this material on an ongoing basis. What they've found looking at crumb rubber, and as I said, there's not been as much research on rubber mulch as there has been in crumb rubber, but they're finding in a number of studies that the toxins that leach out of these many of them are airborne. And if you're, especially in an enclosed area, which happens with some of the facilities that would be enclosed play fields, they're measurable amounts to the point where you could actually smell it. You find it in the soil, you find it in the water. So this stuff is leaching out, and it's getting into the environment around it. Benzothiazole is one of these compounds. It's an airborne compound. It's found almost every time these tests are done, and it is a human health hazard. Another group of compounds are polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, or PAHs, and those are also found routinely whenever these studies are done as one of the leachates that is measurable. And then again, the heavy metals. So there's quite a bit of substantial peer-reviewed research on this, and I'll have to say there's also tests that don't show anything. So I can't say the jury's out, because I don't really think it is. I think the issue is when you're measuring something in a field situation, you're going to have a lot of variables, and depending on wind and other types of environmental activities, you may not get the same measurements as you do in other situations. But I think that there's enough research that's been published in enough different peer-reviewed journals to suggest that crumb rubber probably is an issue, and I know that there are places in the country where the artificial fields have been taken off and they're going back to a natural grass field just because of the issue specifically with the crumb rubber. So there are some health concerns. There's continued documentation of crumb rubber toxins in turf fields, and by I mean continued, I mean almost every month when I get into the literature to look at things, and I haven't been doing it on a monthly basis, but every time I look, there's new papers, and so there's several papers every year that come out specifically on this topic, because it is one that communities are more and more concerned about. So from a crumb rubber standpoint, it's really a substantial, robust field of literature that raises concerns about human health. There is not that robust literature on rubber mulches, so it's difficult to make comparisons, because rubber mulches, of course, are larger size than crumb rubber. People aren't playing on it and falling down and being in contact with all the time like they might be on turf fields. But that's not to say that there's no potential contamination dangers anyway. So what I try to tell people, gardeners and others that are concerned about using rubber mulches, is that they should just be aware of potential contaminants. We just don't have the documented research to show that rubber mulches themselves are going to cause this problem. There's a lot of anecdotal information. We know that the flammability issue is real and demonstrated, but the toxic concern is just not there yet. So if you were to advise somebody about using rubber mulches in the landscape, and you were especially interested in recycling and the whole issue of environmental sustainability, there are some benefits, and I have to be fair and say that there are. One is that there's a lot of colors available, so you may not particularly want to go for the whole rainbow of colors, but you can. There's other ones that look more natural. The fact is that a lot of people, when they garden, they like to have a nice, neat, uniform look, and sometimes aesthetics will trump everything else. They're easy to find. The big box stores have them. The different colored ones might be a little more difficult, but they're easily available on the internet. They're very easy to apply. It doesn't take any kind of special tools. You just dump and spread. And you don't have to apply it nearly as often as you do if you were using another type of mulch, especially organic mulches. So those are the benefits. You'll notice that there is nothing there in terms of plant health or soil health or in pest management, and that's because there is no science demonstrating that. So there is no real scientific benefit to using rubber mulches. There are, however, some drawbacks. Short term, we can see it's a poor choice for weed control. Weeds are weeds for reasons because they can grow anywhere. And a lot of them are able to either avoid taking up toxins or otherwise tolerant to toxins. That's why they grow in places that nothing else can grow. They are attracted to at least some nuisance insects. Not enough published information to make more broad generalizations than with Asian cockroaches, but the Asian cockroaches, I think, are bad enough. And then finally, they're highly flammable. So those are three short-term issues to be aware of when using these as landscape mulch. Long-term, we know that as they break down, they're going to release heavy metals and organic chemicals. It's what things do when they're broken down by microbes. There is no doubt they're going to end up in the soil and in the water. And there are the potentially negative effects on human environmental health from that. As I said, there is good evidence from the crumb rubber, but not specifically from rubber mulches themselves. However, it does lead to an interesting question, as you can see from the picture there on the left. You know, that's what a tire dump looks like. That's actually a legal tire dump, and just waiting for something to come along and use it. But my husband actually came up with this thought, which is that the EPA classifies illegally dumped tires as pollutants. So if you were to dump tires someplace where they didn't belong and someone caught you, you could be fined for pollution. So the question is, how does this differ from legal dumping as a landscape mulch? And I think it's a really good question, because if the EPA says that dumped tires are pollutants, it must be something they're concerned about getting into the air or water or soil. So that must be true with landscape mulches as well. Now there are some alternatives, and I've learned in the myth busting that I do that if I just come up with a lot of negative things and don't have any positive alternatives, that people get frustrated because then they don't know what to do. So I always have lots of good alternatives to products or practices that aren't really demonstrated to be scientifically based. So these particular alternatives are better performers in terms of the benefits that mulches are supposed to bring to a landscape, and they pose no environmental risk. So these would include things like living mulches, inorganic mulches, and organic mulches. So living mulches are those that they would act kind of like a cover crop does if you were looking at an agricultural situation. The nice thing about doing them in a landscape is that they have an aesthetic component as well. So a living mulch obviously is going to protect the soil, it's going to shade it, it will be competitive for water, but the fact that it can help keep weeds out and keep compaction from occurring are two of its great advantages. Neat thing is that nurseries have started to discover these benefits as well, and there's ones that are marketed specifically for being good turf replacements or bare soil covers because they will tolerate foot traffic. And so things like creeping strawberry or thymes or some of the mosses are actually fairly resistant to at least moderate foot traffic and are good alternatives in that respect to using rubber mulches. Inorganic mulches are good choices as well, and some of them can be really quite pretty. The one there on the left is just a pebble mulch, but they have tumbled glass into it as well, so recycled glass. And this is a kind of a neat reuse of a material that otherwise you wouldn't normally expect to find in a landscape, but it's really very pretty, especially when it's been raining. It makes a nice mulch. And then, of course, you can do all kinds of neat things with stones if you have some imagination in terms of laying them out and protecting the soil in that respect. And this is especially important in dry environments. And as I mentioned, if you're anywhere where fire is an issue, you're not going to want to use rubber mulch because there is the flammability issue. So stone mulches are a really good choice for these environments. They keep the soil temperature down, they keep weeds from coming up, and they can be done in a very attractive way. For me, however, my favorite mulch ever is wood chips, and this is a chunky organic mulch. And so chunky organic mulches, by and large, have the best attributes in terms of a sustainable and healthy choice for plants and soils. In the picture there, I can show you the one in the background. On the left is Puyallup wood chips, and this is what they're using along our old railway system, which is now a bike and pedestrian pathway, and it was invaded by blackberries and all kinds of other invasive plants. And they use the woodchip mulch to help suppress the weeds while they establish native plants through there. So it's used very heavily here in Washington State. The one thing that is critical, and this is actually some research that one of my grad students did, is the depth of mulch. And with wood chips, with rubber mulch, it can be very expensive, putting a lot of it down to make it deep enough. And that's one of the reasons that you saw the weeds coming through in the rubber mulch, because unless you've got a deep enough mulch, you're not going to be able to suppress weeds. So this particular picture, which is really pretty neat from a visual perspective, is my grad student's plots, and there's a couple different kinds of wood chips there, and a couple different sizes of wood chips, and different depths. And so what in the center of each of those little square donuts is either a Douglas fir or a snowberry. We're looking at plant establishment as well as weed control. And the reason I want to show you this picture is just to show you how nice and neat everything looked the first year, and by the second year, that's what it looked like. And what I want you to see is where you've got the deeper piles of wood chips is that virtually no weeds will grow in them. They'll grow around them like crazy, but they cannot grow inside deep layers of wood chips. However, the plants that they are surrounding are completely unaffected by the depth. In fact, the deeper it is, the better it is in terms of plant performance. And this is only true if you're using coarse mulches. It does not work with finely textured mulches. So in terms of a great landscape choice, and especially something that is sustainable as a recycled material, arborist wood chips are, if they're not free, they're cheap, because arborists are continually having to take down trees or trim branches, and they chip them up. And here in Seattle, I live in Seattle, and in Seattle 15 years ago, they were having to take them to the landfill and dump them. And now, because of a lot of educational efforts on the part of me and other aficionados of wood chips, they never dump them anymore. In fact, they're starting to charge for them. So there's a real demand for a sustainable and recycled material that is also an excellent choice as a landscape mulch. Some people don't like the looks, and so I try to tempt them with something else, and slow food movement is huge in this country, and so I tell them that wood chip mulches are slow food for landscapes because they break down relatively slowly compared to things like compost, and the worms and the moles and all the little diggers underground are coming up and bringing that good material back down to the plant roots. And so it's a sustainable choice. It doesn't have to be worked in the soil. Nature does that for you, and all you have to do is reapply it. And the neat thing is, especially if you want to talk about aesthetic choices, I mean, there are such great things you can do with not having to use a uniformly colored rubber mulch. There's ways of grouping different types of mulches and combining inorganic, organic, and living mulches. And these are just some examples here of how you can do that. This is a driveway, which is both permeable and low maintenance. It has a variety of different types of grasses that are low growing, and it also, those stones serve to collect pollutants from the cars and oil, and then it's naturally treated as it permeates through that pavement. Some other examples of the same type of thing. We're able to have walkways and still have green space there, as well as reduce runoff. And then finally, an example, and this is actually my own landscape where I've combined living inorganic and organic mulches to create a landscape that has we have no lawn. we have droughty conditions here in the summer, and watering lawns takes an incredible amount of water. So we have a lawnless landscape with a lot of ground cover, woodchip mulches, and inorganic mulches. I do have a fact sheet on this because a lot of times, if you have clients, or if master gardeners need material to work with clients themselves, or you have an extension course, or just even a college course where you're talking about sustainable choices, this literally just got put up, I think, yesterday on our website. And it's specifically I'm talking about today is rubber mulch use in the home landscape. And the nice thing about our publications now is they were heavily revamped over the last couple years, and they now go through a pretty stringent peer review, and there's nothing on our particular website anymore that's more than 5 years old. So you can be assured that in another 5 years, if things change, I'll be updating this one. But it's a good reference, and summarizes the science that I've been talking about today. In addition to that particular publication, this is what our new WSU gardening page looks like. So this is for home gardeners. And even though it's for Washington State, if you realize that our state goes anywhere from being a Zone 8 down to a Zone 4, depending on what side of mountains you are on, and goes anywhere from having 40 or 50 or 60 inches of rain to having 10 inches of rain, we have a really diverse climate. So the materials that we have on our gardening page are really valuable in a lot of different areas, not just Washington State. But this is our gardening page, where we have about 150, 170 free downloadable PDFs, both fact sheets and manuals. I also have my own web page, and at the very end I'll have a list of all the addresses so that you can write them down if you like in terms of being able to find them. This is my web page, which I borrowed or bought the name informedgardener.com for, and on my page you can find a whole bunch of different horticultural myths, and these are downloadable PDFs. I've got fact sheets and case studies. I have a link to our blog, which I'll mention here in just a second, and there's also podcasts. And so myself as an extension specialist, I have realized that not just being online, but getting into social media is an incredibly important thing in terms of reaching an ever-expanding audience. As Nancy mentioned, I also have some books out there. These are all science-based gardening books. Some of them are based on discussing horticultural myths, and others are putting good science into practice. And on the 15th, which is just next week, my newest book is being released, and this is kind of plant physiology for non-scientists. So home gardeners might find this really interesting. I actually have a colleague who plans on using it for his community college basic horticulture class. So it's getting the practical plant physiology out and understandable by a home gardening audience. This is the blog that we've been working on for about 6 years now. It's through eXtension, and start out with 4 of us, who I'll introduce in a second. And we blog on a whole bunch of different things. The only rule is it has to be science-based, and if it's a topic that doesn't have any science behind it, that's fine. We talk about the state of what we know and how much more information we need to get. It has a search function, which is great, so you can put anything in there from biochar to rubber mulch to compost tea to whatever, and you can find what we've written on it in the last 6 years. You can also subscribe so that if there's a comment or a new post that comes up, you'll find out about that too. And just so you know who all of us are, Bert Craig is at Michigan State University. He works primarily with tree nursery industry. Holly Scoggins is at Virginia Tech, and she's a floriculturist and also a taxonomist extraordinaire. Jeff Gilman was at University of Minnesota. He's now at North Carolina. He does a lot of the same kind of myth-busting I do, but he's also works a lot with the nursery industry. And then there's myself. So these are the 4 of us, and we named ourselves the garden professors because it's basically who we are and what we do. And it's been a really great way to reach a lot of people with a lot of good information. So if you are into doing Facebook things, you can find us there. It's been an ever-expanding group, and we found that this is a very quick way to get information out very, very quickly on to a number of topics to a whole bunch of people. So this is our Facebook page. And it's, now you know it's kind of top down. It's us posting things and people passing it on, which is great through social media. But we also started a group as well. And the group is a little bit more egalitarian. In other words, anybody can post anything. So people ask questions. They'll put up links to information they're wondering if it's true or not. And as you can tell by looking at that slide, it says this is a science-based garden discussion group. So everyone knows that's the ground rule. We don't do anecdotal stuff. We don't do Jerry Baker stuff. What we do is good science-based gardening. And we've got now almost 2,600 members in it. We've got a variety of people that are at other institutions who are experts in entomology and pathology and everything else, and it's been a really great way to get questions out there and get a lot of people discussing the science behind them. And so I'll leave you with this slide here. This has my contact information as well as the address for my own personal web page, our blog, and then our Facebook pages and groups. And I know a lot of people really resist doing the Facebook thing. I don't do it so much for the social part as I do for my outreach. And I think that those of you that are doing extension outreach can find this as being a really great way to get information as well as reach people a lot faster than we can using other sources. So that's my presentation, and I'd be happy to take questions that you might have.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Scott. That was a very interesting presentation. We have a few questions here, and then I know we have a number of questions from viewers online. So we'll first take one from here.
Okay.
Very interesting presentation. I've got a comment and a question. The comment would be, I think EPA was listing tires as pollutants mainly because they're industrial strength litter, and they are extremely good habitat for disease-spreading mosquitoes. And my question is, do you remember what the levels of polyaromatic hydrocarbons, particularly things like benzoate pyrene, were in the soil around tires?
That I don't have. What I have is I have the literature with crumb rubber. So that's the unfortunate thing, is there's just not that much out there on looking at them in the landscape. So to be honest, I don't think I have anything on PAH levels with or the other chemicals. They looked at heavy metals, and I don't believe they looked at anything else.
Okay, we'll take some questions from our viewers online now.
Well, the first question we have is from Brandon. In regards to the landscape, the rubber mulch is not safe for landscaping. How was it safe for your brother's sandals company, which people want?
That's a really good question. You know, I think it probably isn't a great thing to reuse in terms of things that you might have your skin in contact with all the time. That was just the very first thing that I was familiar with that was used. That was recycled rubber. I think that, you know, using it as a rubberizing asphalt, and especially in generating energy, it just seems, especially with the increased production of biochars, that there has to be some way of using rubber in that way. In pyrolysis, where you're not releasing gases and you're creating something that potentially can be used as a landscape amendment as well as a carbon sink. It just seems there's much better places to put recycled tires.
Then also in regards to the soil samples, when you had the rubber, were there soil samples taken prior to the rubber mulch being installed in the landscaping?
They have. Well, I'd have to go back and look at their papers because again, this isn't my research. This is just me summarizing what's out there. And I know that they had control sites, and so it was an area where they had, some of it was under rubber mulch and some of the other things, and so Whether or not they did it beforehand, I know that they had controls that they compared it to, and it was all in the same general area. So presumably the only difference would be what type of mulch was covering that soil.
This one comes from Linda. What did it take to ignite the rubber mulch?
Well, I believe they used well, at least one of the studies I know they used a flamethrower, and the other study I'm not quite sure, but it wasn't something like a dropped cigarette. So it would take quite a bit of heat to do it. But this is where wildfires would be a concern. But it wasn't something where they were just dropping a match or a cigarette. It would have to be more fire, more flame than that.
This one's from Jonathan. Could you provide reference for the unpublished work of toxicity of breakdown products on aquatic communities?
Yes. I think on my website it's there, but, well, it may not be. I have a lot of, on the fact sheet itself, that's the address is there for, there's quite a few references. However, the faculty member from Bucknell, as I said, she had a report, but she didn't ever put it into a journal article, and I'd talked to her, and she was intending to, but she still hasn't yet. So you've got my email address there. If you'd like to email me, I can look it up and give you the report.
This one's from Jonathan also. What are the sources of colorants in the rubber mulches?
I honestly don't know, and I actually tried to find out. I won't say I spent a ton of time on it to discover what they used as a dye. I have absolutely no idea.
Then some of the woods have low pH chemical species like tannins, maybe phytoxic, and the C/N ratio of wood is high, and if leached in the same proportion can be detrimental to plant growth. Is there data indicating that wood mulch can be detrimental to plant germination and growth?
Woodchip mulches will not lower the pH of the soil, nor will they tie up nitrogen in the soil. They will at the point where they're touching the soil. So right there at the surface, they will do both of those things. But the soil volume itself is massive compared to the mulch, and there's substantial literature on this that demonstrates that there's not an issue with nitrogen or pH changes from using woodchip mulches. So I actually have a review paper I did, a literature review in 2007. It's in the Journal of Environmental Horticulture that discusses landscape mulches in great detail, including woodchip mulches and the science behind them. So I'd be happy to send a copy of that. I can't link to it because Journal of Environmental Horticulture doesn't allow live links, but I do have a PDF, and I can send that to you if you email me.
Okay, we have a question here, and I'll ask that. In the picture where you showed the fire at the playground, you said vandals had ignited that. Did the article say what the vandals used to ignite that so that it burned so much?
Yeah, with that particular one, I couldn't find information that said how they did it, but I know that in other ones where I have read more detail, they tend to use gasoline or some other type of fuel, and then they pour that on, they dump, throw a match, and that's how most of them have been lit.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That's all for the questions here and online. If anyone has any other questions, they can certainly email Dr. Scott at her email address. We will have her PowerPoint slides up so you don't have to copy down all these links. Those should be posted in the next few days on the ISTC website. And we will also have the video of this presentation posted at that time if you want to check back on that. We certainly appreciate you coming to us long distance from Washington today, and we look forward to talking to you again about this important subject. Thanks very much, and we welcome everyone back. April 30th, we'll have a talk on zero waste if you want to register to view that or come to ISTC to be here in person. Thank you very much.
Thank you.